And we have a motion in the name of Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. At the UN Climate Change Conference in Katowice in Poland this week, Sir David Attenborough said, "Right now, we are facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change." He went on, "If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon." That's David Attenborough. The message is clear. Time is running out. It's already a matter of life or death for many people in countries across the world right now. It's not just isolated, drowning islands in faraway oceans, but whole towns like Paradise in California, where recently at least 85 people died, many burned in their cars, fleeing the wildfires that destroyed their whole town. And we're at a critical point. Average global temperatures have increased by 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial times. That's as a direct result of our use of fossil fuels and our carbon emissions. This degree of warming is seeing worrying rates of Arctic sea ice shrinkage, accelerated sea level rises, and more frequent extreme weather events. We probably all remember the frightening hurricanes that swept across the Caribbean last year, where thousands of people died and thousands more people lost everything. Not just one hurricane, but almost a whole alphabet of them. Hurricanes Arlene, Brett, Cindy, Don, Emily, Franklin, Gert, Irma, Jose, Katia, Lee, Maria, Nate, Ophelia, Philippe, Rena. It's been estimated that Hurricane Maria alone killed 4,645 people during the storm and its aftermath. And this year, the extensive wildfires in California and Greece and the forest fires that raged as far as inside the Arctic circles as this summer turned abnormally wide areas into a tinderbox. And we heard just now from the Fire Commissioner about the way that the London Fire Brigade has had to deal with so many more grass fires here in London, and how much resource of the brigade has been taken up with that, and also helping colleagues deal with peat fires elsewhere in the UK. The trend is very clear. Climate change is happening, and as politicians, we owe it to our communities to act. And how many more warnings do we ignore? Do we wait until London has been hit by a devastating extreme weather event that might cost billions, lose lives, and take years to recover from? Assembly Member Twycross is quite rightly including climate change in the risks identified in her Resilience Forum work. Perfect timing. We may have only 12 years before we potentially lose control. The recent study from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, with their recent report, showed that at the current rate of warming, average global temperatures could exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius as early as 2030. That's just 12 years away. And the 1.5 degree temperature is like a guardrail between what the global scientific consensus believes we have a chance to cope with, and on the other hand, unimaginable and irreversible social, environmental and economic devastation. And keeping to 1.5 degrees warming is going to be hard, but it is possible. Although that's only if we focus, collaborate with people across the world and take these risks seriously. School children in Australia are on strike about climate change, and they're calling on politicians to act. Citizens in London and across the UK are calling for action to tackle the climate emergency. Now, the Mayor's 2050 zero carbon target is now beginning to look a little too little too late. It's not going to stop temperatures from overshooting the 1.5 degree threshold to 2, 3, or possibly even 4 degrees of warming. And that would leave us reliant on just unproven technologies like carbon capture to try and sort it out. So why am I urging you to support this motion? Because the responsibility lies with us. The actions that we take today and in the next few years will affect all aspects of our lives, our children's lives, and those of all future generations. On the 14th of November, the City of Bristol declared a climate emergency, with the Council unanimously backing a motion by Councillor Carla Denyer with a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030 in an effort to avoid irreversible climate breakdown. This is the scale of ambition that we need if we're going to safeguard Londoners and all our futures. And that is why I'm proposing that the Mayor declares a climate emergency, sets out the actions needed to make London carbon neutral by 2030, and that he calls on the government to give him the powers to make this possible. Okay. And by example, setting a precedent for other UK and world cities to follow. I move the motion.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Berry.
I formally second and reserve my
I think we have an amendment tabled. Assembly Member Cooper to move the amendment.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And that was an interesting contribution from Assembly Member Russell. The motion was carried unanimously in Bristol, but that may be because it didn't contain an attack on Marvin Rees, the Labour Mayor of Bristol, and all of the Labour members in Bristol felt quite happy to carry the motion. So I find it extremely disappointing that you've drafted something that contains what I consider to be an entirely gratuitous attack on the Mayor of London. On the 26th of November, Michael Gove was talking about climate change and climate emergency and the urgency of the need to acknowledge that weather patterns are changing in the world. On the 27th of November, every single British paper was talking about extreme weather. And we know it's not just grass fires and heat and really hot summers. We also know it's bursts of intense rainfall, which we're unable to capture, and that creates drought likelihood. But we also see warmer winters and more likelihood of flooding as well. So we know that the temperature and weather and climate is changing. We know that there is a big issue which has been acknowledged by members of the Conservative Party, members of the Labour Party, and members, of course, of the Green Party. So why do you find it necessary to draft something that, you know, the Mayor has done an awful lot. He has already moved forward implementing the T-charge. We've brought forward the introduction of the ultra-low emission zone. He's also joined the fight against the launch of Heathrow's third runway. And so to include an attack on the Mayor in this motion seems entirely gratuitous. But worse than that, worse than making gratuitous attacks on the Mayor, I also find it quite difficult to be lectured by Caroline about the need for addressing a climate emergency when the Greens have actually refused to serve on the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee. Now, you know, if you really took these issues seriously and you really were concerned about the impact of climate and weather on this great city of ours, you would actually be serving on that committee and picking up these issues under the leadership of Assembly Member Hall and Assembly Member Dismore, who are doing great work with taking these issues forward and making sure that this committee, working together with the Deputy Mayor for Fire, is able to address the concerns that you are just talking about. What I can't stand, and I believe there may be others in this chamber who feel the same way, is what I would characterise as virtue signalling. And it seems to me that not serving on a committee that is actually addressing the practical realities of what we're calling a climate emergency, but just coming here to talk about it in this chamber, consists of nothing but virtue signalling. So we've amended this motion. We've taken out the attacks on the Mayor, who we do think is stepping up, and other mayors around the country have come to work with him in terms of the work that he's doing on clean air. And we've also said that declaring a climate emergency is one thing, but it must be supported by specific emergency plans, and that he needs the powers and, of course, the funding, and that includes for the fire brigade being able to address these issues properly in terms of funding for flooding as well as for fire. And I hope you will all support this amendment. Thank you.
Formally second and reserve my right to speak, but I'm not sure if it's required at this moment in time.
Are you proposing to accept this amendment?
I certainly am, yes.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to speak, or should we go straight to the summation? Or speeches from the seconders if they wish to speak? Okay, so we will take a summing up speech on the motion as amended. And that is...
Thank you very much. I am very happy to accept this amendment from the Labour group, which makes 2 changes to the motion. It very sensibly asks the, actually it makes 3, asks the mayor to ask the government for the funding to make this climate emergency action possible. That is, of course, a really helpful addition, and I accept that with great gratitude. I'm sorry that Assemblymember Cooper thinks that that this was an unnecessary attack on the mayor. I was making the point that having a plan that works to 2050 now, in the light of the IPCC report that has changed the whole context the mayor is working in, makes the plans for 2050 not look ambitious enough. I did not intend to attack the mayor on his excellent work addressing climate changes and environmental issues. However, the other thing that the amendment does is to support specific emergency plans. I just ask them to be drawn up, but if they need to be specific, I'm very, very happy to accept that amendment. Politicians are doing pretty badly on all of this. Protesters are demonstrating. They can't believe we're just so left behind. They don't want to hug a husky. They're just exasperated that we are not taking these risks seriously. So I hope very much that members will support this motion.
Thank you. Those in favour of the motion as amended, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, Chairman.
Those against, please show.
None against, Chairman.
Okay, do I have to call for abstention? Okay. Well, the motion is carried.